The line, here comes the 1-0. Swung on, belted deep toward right. Burnett's on the run toward the corner, looks up. He did it. It's out of here. Sosa with a home run, number 64.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to an episode of Just Say Guay. I'm your host, George Guay. Today I'm joined by Chip Caray, who's been involved with the broadcasting side of baseball for many years. Chip, thanks for coming on.
George, my pleasure. How are you?
Good. So before we get into the questions, could you just introduce where you've been in baseball before, where you are now, things like that?
Sure. How long's your show? I work for the Atlanta Braves currently. I'm a baseball TV play-by-play guy for Fox Sports South, now owned by Sinclair Corporation. Before that, I was with the Chicago Cubs for 7 years. Before that, I was with the Seattle Mariners for 3 years. Before that, I was with the Atlanta Braves. Also did some national work for Fox Sports for their national baseball coverage. And I was the first TV announcer for the Orlando Magic starting in 1989 when Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway eventually came onto the scene in Central Florida. So currently in Atlanta, hoping to get back and seeing baseball on the field here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely so with me. I'd love to see it back on the field. So your grandfather was a very well-known broadcaster, same with your father. At what point did you think that you wanted to get involved with it as well?
I didn't really think about it much until I was in college, or about to go to college, I should say. Like every kid who grew up in the Midwest, I was a Cardinal fan, wanted to be a baseball player. Ted Simmons was my favorite player. But once I figured out that they're going to throw curveballs and throw really hard, I probably wasn't well equipped enough to be a professional baseball player. But my aha moment came in Atlanta. I was with my dad after my junior or senior year. And he was doing a broadcast for the Braves. They just beat the Dodgers in walk-off fashion. Bob Watson hit a pinch-hit grand slam, and my dad had the call on radio. And he and I were riding home from the ballpark around midnight, and they played his call, and the old proverbial hair on the back of your neck stood up moment for me happened, and he just looked at me like something was wrong. And he said, "What's up?" I said, "I'd really like to do that someday." And my dad, who never pushed me into broadcasting, never tried to convince me to do it like his father had, just sort of drove home in silence, sat down with me at 1 o'clock in the morning now and said, "Were you serious about what you said a little while ago?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, then we get started tomorrow." And that's how it began.
It's a great story and a lot of rich history. So you're with Atlanta now after being with Chicago. What's different about being in Atlanta as opposed to Chicago? You know, Chicago, you got the Cubs starving for a world championship. Atlanta with different market. What's different about it?
I think that's the best way to put it, George. It's a very different market. Chicago's a highly condensed, baseball crazy, passionate city, densely populated. The people that are involved with the Cubs are extremely passionate about their team. Same with the White Sox. I mean, the old saying in Chicago is, if you're a White Sox fan, you want the Cubs to lose more than you want the White Sox to win. So there's an awful lot of shall we say, cross-city rivalry that goes between those two, as my son's standing behind me. But you know, Wrigley Field, I mean, it's a baseball cathedral. It's an historic place. They've been playing baseball there for 100 years. You mentioned the Cubs situation when I was there. Yeah, they were still looking for that ever-elusive World Series championship, and they were looking for winning seasons. There weren't a lot of them when I was there, as opposed to Atlanta, which is a big spread-out city. It's not nearly as condensed as Chicago. Our fan base is really spread over 6 or 7 different states, as it were. I mean, people come to Atlanta on the weekends from all over the Southeast to watch the Braves play. In Chicago, you know, you have 38,000 people out of a 7 million population, a pretty good chance to fill up your ballpark. But still passionate, knowledgeable fans who, in Atlanta, spoiled by success, and I mean that in the ultimate of compliments. So it truly was a culture shock for me to go back to Atlanta from Chicago because, as I said, when I was with the Cubs, had a couple of good years, but a lot of bad ones. And in Atlanta, they were used to winning every season. And luckily for me, that continued in 2005.
Let's get into the 30 for 30 that was on last Sunday night. I absolutely loved it because there's so much to learn about. When did you know that you were going to be involved in that?
They called me about 1.5 years ago and talked about they were doing a special. And then it was a matter of just finding the time to be able to sit down and work on everybody's schedule. Obviously, they flew across the country and were crisscrossing the nation to get people to talk about that amazing 98 season. But I sat down with them last July or August, I think it was, in Atlanta at the ballpark before one of the games. And the guys with ESPN couldn't have been more gracious and helpful. And I'm flattered that so many people liked it. Wasn't anything I had to do with it. It was just me remembering the 98 season. And that's what I kind of took the documentary to be. It wasn't supposed to be any earth-shattering kind of announcement like the Michael Jordan Last Dance stuff. But this is really just sort of a look back at two guys in baseball and how we perceived it at the time and how we perceive it now. And quite frankly, considering the current events in baseball, how much we need that kind of joy and passion and excitement in our sport again. And as I said, I hope we get to that real soon.
Yeah, so that was a big year for Chicago because, Jordan beats the Jazz in Game 6. That was the Last Dance, which was a big ESPN special. What was that year like also with the Cubs to have, that going on at the same time?
It was crazy. And you make a great point. 98, everybody knew in Chicago that this was going to be it for Michael Jordan with the Bulls. And they were looking for it, were the fans, sporting fans of Chicago, somebody they could wrap their arms around, somebody they could embrace as their next great hero. And when Sammy Sosa went off in June with his 20 home runs, I think people in Chicago really started to recognize just how big of a personality he was becoming. Look, nobody was going to be Michael Jordan in Chicago, nobody. But Sammy Sosa with that hop, that smile, keeping the Cubs in the playoff race, all the stuff that he was doing that year and quite frankly had done in previous seasons, all of a sudden people were seeing him come out from under the shadow of guys like Michael Jordan. And wow, this guy's actually a really good player. And he put up gigantic numbers. I mean, MVP numbers in 98. The Cubs made the playoffs. Sammy was so street smart and knew how to market himself to our community, our Cubs nation, as it were, and it paid off. I mean, this is a guy that went from selling oranges and shining shoes in the Dominican Republic to a couple of years later sitting in the front row of the Capitol Rotunda for the State of the Union speech with President Clinton. So it truly was a meteoric rise for Sammy Sosa, and he had a terrific run in Chicago all the way up to the end of the 2004 season.
It's definitely a great story. So after the home run chase in 97, I know it wasn't as big as 98, obviously, because 98 had the 30 for 30. It was between McGuire and Griffey, a little bit smaller, but was there a feel in the air that this could happen again?
Yeah, I think so. There were whispers about illegal substances, but nobody was testing for them. So even if a guy was taking, there wasn't anything anybody could do about it. I don't know that I had many suspicions. I was pretty naive about it, to be honest with you. But I think some other factors have to be talked about in that home run era as well. We were in the middle of the retro ballpark craze. The ballparks were a lot smaller, more hitter friendly. We wanted to get more offense in the game. Number two, we were in expansion years. Baseball had thinned out pitching all around the major leagues. There wasn't the depth or breadth of quality starting pitching or relief pitching for that matter. And good hitters obviously feasted on that as well. And that's not in any way or shape or form saying that, yeah, there were probably some chemical enhancements for hitters and pitchers alike. But look, 98 was a watershed year. You're right. People thought it would be Ken Griffey Jr. and Mark McGuire. Sammy Sosa, I don't want to say came out of nowhere because he'd hit 30 home runs before, but nobody anticipated him being in the conversation, but that changed with that 20-homer June.
Yeah, so the home run race was something I had to read about more. And even though these guys won a role, you mentioned Sammy Sosa, it's 20 home runs in June. Was there a worry at times that the race might slow down because Sosa combined for 22 in July and August, and Mark McGuire went for 8 games where he didn't even hit a home run? Was there a sense of worry that, hey, this might not be as what we thought it could be, or do you think that, hey, it's just part of the game, it's such a long season?
It was part of the game, long season, hot months. If you've ever spent any time in St. Louis in July or August, you can go on the field and melt. The same in Chicago, where the weather at Wrigley Field is so important as to how the game is played. Wind blowing out, everybody can hit homers. When the wind's blowing in, you hit a basket bomb. That's pretty impressive. But no, I didn't think of it in any terms at all. Like, wow, this race is slowing down, because 60 home runs or 70 home runs just seems so impossible. Nobody was thinking about breaking Babe Ruth or Roger Maris's record per se. It was who was going to hit more home runs. And for the Cubs, it was, are they going to get to the playoffs? And that was the first thing. And then when Sammy kind of caught McGuire in late August and September, I think they were tied, or maybe Sammy led for 25 minutes in the home run chase. All of a sudden, the fans in Chicago kind of perked up their ears and said, wait a minute, the Cubs might make the playoffs and Sammy might win the home run chase. And that was what was really exciting for the fans in Chicago. But what was great for baseball fans is, as many times as you saw baseball scores, every scoreboard around Major League Baseball had a McGuire and a number and a Sosa and a number on the scoreboard next to the National and American League scores, because they just captured everybody's imagination with their unbelievable home run totals.
Yeah, definitely a lot going on in that season, especially with the Cubs. take me back into the beginning of September. It was the most anticipated series of the season, Cubs and the Cardinals. And you had McGuire hit that electric home run, and Sammy Sosa runs out and hugs him. And it just shows that it really wasn't a rivalry at all. I mean, they definitely really liked each other. What was it like to be a part of that, especially since you don't see that with two competitors today as much as you would like to?
Yeah, I was really lucky in that season. I had two games that still are among my all-time favorites. Obviously, Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout game, the best game ever pitched in the history of baseball, according to the game score people. But I grew up in St. Louis. I was a Cardinal fan, as I said. I saw Lou Brock get his 3,000th hit. Ted Simmons was my favorite player. Jack Buck was my favorite broadcaster. And we had the good fortune of being there the night that McGuire hit that home run off Steve Traxel. And what made that moment so exciting is you're too young to remember, but in the lead up to all these big home runs, both at Wrigley Field and on the road, there were fans packing the bleachers, and at Wrigley, standing outside the ballpark to try to catch home runs during games. And the big thing was, well, who catches the ball? How much is it going to be worth, right? So it became less about the moment itself, but who was going to get rich out of the deal? And would McGuire or Sosa get the ball if they broke the record first, et cetera, et cetera? McGuire, you might recall, hit a top spin line drive that barely cleared the fence. And one of the Cardinals groundskeepers was walking back there and picked up the ball on a bounce and handed it to Mark McGuire at home plate. Didn't ask for a penny, but just did the right thing. Well, he was showered with college scholarships. I think he got a car out of the deal. I mean, just people recognized that he did the right thing for baseball. And so when Sammy came charging in, there are times where, we don't like a lot of fraternization in sports. There are times where, before a big game, it's all business, let's go. But this was a moment that, knowing what we knew then, was bigger than the game. And the handshakes and the hugs and all that kind of stuff. Same thing happened when Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's record. The Dodgers were shaking his hand and patting him on the back when he ran around the bases at Old Fulton County Stadium. And those are the kinds of moments that I think transcend the great rivalry of the Cardinals or the Cubs or Sosa or McGuire or their fan base and the Cubs fan base. It was great theater. And the best moment of all for me was watching Jack Buck standing up in the Cardinal radio booth, wearing his red jacket, tears streaming down his face, and applauding as the fireworks went off and Mark McGuire hugged his son at home plate. That was baseball magic, baseball theater.
Definitely a special moment that people remember forever. What was it like that, that these two teams were rivals and they still made it work? They were the bestest of friends in the whole league, and you still had that Chicago-St. Louis thing going, and people wanted that race. What was it like that? Because I think if I saw that with, David Ortiz and Alex Rodriguez growing up, I don't think I'd be rooting for A-Rod to hit home runs. I'd want him to hit no home runs. Was something special?
Yeah, it was. Again, that's, I think, some of the ethos of Midwestern folk. They love the game of baseball, and I think they were able to, as I said, rise above the petty rivalry. When McGuire and the Cardinals would come to Chicago, they wouldn't boo Mark McGuire. They cheered him. They wanted to see him hit home runs. The pitchers for either team didn't want to see the other guy go deep. Steve Traxel certainly didn't want to be the guy that gave up number 62. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. It was good-natured ribbing, and it was a great deal of appreciation. I mean, if you've ever been to a game in St. Louis, the great thing about Cardinals fans is, and again, growing up there, this is the way we were taught, if the Cardinals opponent makes a great play, you appreciate that great play because you're there to watch the baseball game. You want the Cardinals to win, but you're there to watch baseball too. And I think that's something else that sort of permeated that rivalry was, this is about baseball. This is not just about the Cubs and the Cardinals. And for, again, one of those rare opportunities at the end of the season with game 163, the Cubs had the last laugh over the Cardinal Nation. They made the playoffs and St. Louis didn't. And that was again, cherry on top, the sprinkles on the sundae, as it were.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more that goes on in that season than you think about. So I actually have a question, and it might be personal with Sammy Sosa. I feel so bad with how everything unfolded at the end of his career and how he's kind of been an outcast with the Cubs. Why is it that certain players get treated differently, you think? Because, Mark McGuire's in the Cardinals Hall of Fame. I've never been an A-Rod fan, but what I've noticed is that it seems like even though he was a cheater with the game, the way he acts now as a broadcaster and a great dad, and he's married to J-Lo, it's like people want to forget about that, or he wants people to forget about that. Why do you think there's such a different treatment with different players?
Oh, I don't know. I think obviously we're a forgiving society. If people do things wrong and you own up to it and you say, "I'm sorry, I'll never do it again," what else can you say? I am not here to say what Sammy Sosa did or didn't do. He claims he didn't do anything. I am in no position to say that Sammy Sosa is lying. I have to take him at his word. I do know, and I would bet my mortgage on the fact that there were probably hundreds of other players in Major League Baseball who were taking things they shouldn't have and have never admitted it, and no one will ever know. That aside, I try to look at these guys as human beings with the same fears, same failures, same frailties that you and I have. They just happen to make a lot of money and they work on a very, very bright stage. I'm in no position to explain why they did what they did. I'm in no position to try to explain it away. They did it. They have to live with those consequences, as Mark McGuire has. Why he's in the Hall of Fame in St. Louis, that's a question for them. His performance on the field certainly warrants it. For me personally, with the Chicago Cubs, Sammy Sosa's performance on the field certainly warrants that. Was Sammy a perfect teammate? His teammates will tell you absolutely not. Could Sammy be a prima donna at times? Absolutely, he could. But was Sammy the show in Chicago for a 6 or 7 year period? Yes. Did he make the Cubs organization a ton of money? Yes. Did he blast a bunch of home runs, more home runs, I believe, than any other Cub in the history of the franchise? Absolutely. For his performance on the field and what he meant to the team, in my opinion, Sammy Sosa should be celebrated as one of their great players. Whether that happens or not, that's between the Cubs and Sammy. But again, considering all the things that we have going on in the world, this argument and this kind of, shall we say, civil war that's been going on between the two of them, it's going on for 22 years. Enough's enough. I personally like to see a détente take place and a meeting of the minds. Give him his day. Say thank you to Chicago. Have Chicago say thank you back, and try to welcome him back. I think that'd be good for them and be good for him too.
Great answer, and I definitely agree. So obviously there's a chance that baseball might not come back, and you saw that happen in the 90s. We saw that Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa really brought people back into baseball with something really exciting. If the season can't happen, what do you think is something that could happen that would bring people back the way that those two did?
Well, I'm an optimist. I think we're going to have baseball. I think we're going to play. I think we're worried about how many games. We're obviously worried about the virus and what impact that's going to have. But I think to answer your question, I think that depends on what path baseball takes. If they try to get on the field, and if they hammer out an agreement, and I think they will, no matter how ugly it looks, if they can get on the field and try, and for whatever reason the virus goes crazy or something inexplicable happens and you have to stop, I think people will give them a break. If, however, they fight over money and don't get on the field because of finances in a time where we have a pandemic, where 40 million people are unemployed, where 100,000 people have died from this, I don't know that there will be a whole lot of people that have sympathy for either side, and there will be a number of people that never forgive them for that. To your point about 94 in the World Series, I think that the lesson that was learned, Tom Glavine talked about this, and he's my partner in Atlanta. He said, we can't do this to the game anymore. And Rob Manfred said as much the other day. I think he said that yesterday. At some point, this has to stop. They are dragging each other across barbed wire and broken glass to a finish line that could have been accomplished and reached 6 or 7 weeks ago. For whatever reason, they never even talked. That's unfortunate. Time's a ticking. But I do believe that the people who are negotiating, the people who are involved with the player side and the owner side deeply love baseball. I hope they deeply value the fans, but I hope they also understand that every day that passes without an agreement and every day that they fight over money, in this case for the owners, yeah, it's a big year, it's a down year, and it's going to be a painful one. But considering all the great years they've had in the decade preceding this season, I think they got to find a way to get the players on the field and give the game back to the fans and the paying customers who are going to be watching it on TV and not in the ballparks. I'm optimistic that that's going to happen. No doubt, it's an ugly process. The old saying, if you like laws and sausages, don't watch them being made. That's applying to baseball in 2020, and I firmly believe it's the wrong argument at the wrong time for both sides.
I think that's a good mindset to have. I hope they get back on the field. I know you think that too. And Chip, I want to thank you for coming on my show. I'll definitely let you know if I ever get down to Atlanta.
Look forward to it, George. Thanks for having me. All the best to you.
Thank you.